The Jets may have just won a game with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, and Taylor is an upgrade over Justin Fields. But make no mistake about it, the Jets should be looking to clean house this offseason at quarterback. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, December 3rd, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, our episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Today, our questions include one about the age-old debate. Is it better for the Jets to lose games for draft position this time of year or to win and try and build a culture? We'll offer an early report card on the job Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey have done in year one, and we'll talk a lot about the Jets quarterback's position and what they should do going forward. And that's where we begin. Our first question comes from Dan, who writes, John, easy question. What would your plan be to address quarterback this offseason? Well, Dan, I don't know that it's a super easy question because it's difficult to give names right now of the players I would pursue for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't know which veterans are going to be available in the offseason. December and January could change which veteran quarterbacks become available when we get to free agency. Another factor in this, and this is a huge factor, is we have a lot of college football left to play. This is championship weekend. Then we have the full playoff to go, not to mention the entire pre-draft process. You'll get to the Senior Bowl. You'll get to the Combine. You'll have the in-person workout. You'll have the interviews, which will be critical with quarterbacks. So the quarterbacks could go up or down the board. And we also don't know where the Jets are going to draft because there may be a great quarterback prospect. And I've just kind of really begun a deep dive looking at the quarterbacks, but we don't know which quarterbacks the Jets will be in position to draft. So I can't tell you specifically which quarterbacks the Jets should target, but I can offer some broad thoughts about what the Jets should do at the quarterback position. And my first broad thought is that the Jets should probably clean house at quarterback. There are three quarterbacks currently employed by this team: Justin Fields, Tyrod Taylor, and Brady Cook. And I think in an ideal world, none of them would be back next year. In an ideal world, the Jets would bring in three new signal callers. And I think there are different reasons for me wanting to move on from all three. I think Fields is the most obvious. It just has been a failure. It's been a colossal failure. I get why the Jets did it. Even when the Jets signed him, I said that, it was a calculated gamble. Well, it's a calculated gamble that has completely failed. Maybe it'll work someday for Justin Fields in the NFL. It's not going to happen in New York. I think that ship has sailed. I don't think he gelled with this coaching staff. I think you can ask questions about why the Jets installed the type of offense they were running, because this was a very traditional NFL-style offense. And I think Fields' skill set, to the extent he has a skill set, could only be maximized in a different type of offense. And it was one the Jets clearly had no interest in running. And from that standpoint, I don't even know why the Jets tried with Fields, but Fields has been so in over his head this year that I'm not even sure it would have worked anyway. I'm not sure there's anything that the Jets could have done to get good production out of Justin Fields. And, one of the things I always say is that, while I think the Jets have some culpability, at the end of the day, most of it's on Fields, because Fields just has not developed. And this is not Fields' first team. It's not his second team. This is not his first coaching staff. It's not his second coaching staff. It's not his third coaching staff. This is year 5 in the NFL for Justin Fields. And we're still saying a lot of the same things we said in year 1. The Jets gave him $30 million guaranteed, which, by the standards of quarterbacks in the NFL, is not a ton of money. It's not franchise-altering money, but it's still, looking back, a very poor contract the Jets signed him to. And, depending on how the Jets do it, if they want to make him a post-June 1st cut, they can reduce his cap hit next year and push a lot of the cap hit to 2027. And it's not going to be a great financial situation for the Jets next year at the quarterback position, because that's where the bulk of Aaron Rodgers' money hits the cap in terms of dead money. So now you could be adding Justin Fields to that. But even though Fields still has guaranteed money left next year, I think the Jets just need to move on. This has been a failure. I think things have clearly not gone well. And if it's going to work for Fields, it's just going to work somewhere else. I think we're too far gone. It hasn't worked with his coaching staff, and the fan base has turned on Fields. It's time to turn the page. That brings us to Tyrod Taylor. And Taylor's kind of a popular guy because the Jets just beat the Atlanta Falcons. But I got to be honest with you, I didn't think Taylor was that great in the game. The Jets won mainly because they had 3 scoring drives that were set up by special teams plays. The Jets only had 2 scoring drives in the entire game that went for more than 20 yards. I think Taylor's like a slight upgrade on Fields at this point. Look, Tyrod should start the rest of the season. Maybe if we get to like week 17, week 18, and Tyrod's struggling, you turn to Brady Cook then, give Brady Cook a couple of reps. But look, you're still trying to win games at this point, and Tyrod is the best option, but that doesn't mean Tyrod's a good option. In fact, I think there's a lot of similarities between Tyrod and Fields. I think there are 3 main differences. Number one, Tyrod pushes the ball down the field. Tyrod throws deep, and Fields has stopped doing that despite being very aggressive as a deep thrower early in his career with Chicago. Fields just stopped throwing the ball deep down the field. The second is that Tyrod actually has some aptitude at evading pressure, which Fields does not. Fields steps into sacks. Tyrod holds the ball for too long. He stares down reads, but he at least like evades pressure. He can get outside the pocket and extend plays and make something happen. And the third difference is that while Tyrod is a quality scrambler, look, he scrambled for a touchdown in that game against Atlanta. He's shown some ability with his mobility. He's not as dynamic with Fields as a runner. The first 2 are more important than the third. The first 2 make Tyrod a better quarterback than Fields, but Tyrod's in his mid-30s. Outside of that 3-year stretch in Buffalo, he's a career backup, and he's clearly near the end. And I think that he only looks good in comparison with Justin Fields. I think if you compare Tyrod with like an actual quality NFL quarterback, he's not going to look very good. And he's in his mid-30s. He's in decline. Consummate professional, didn't get in the way of the Jets beating Atlanta, but I think in an ideal world, you'd move on. And then Brady Cook, if you want to bring Brady Cook back next year, I guess that's okay as like a developmental guy. I just don't think that there's a lot of ability there. So what should the Jets do? Well, it depends on who's available. Depends on where you're drafting. I think the Jets should draft a quarterback. The question is whether you draft him in the first round or not. And, in the past, a few weeks back before the Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams trades, I was against drafting a quarterback, but I was specifically against drafting a quarterback in the first round. I was not against drafting a quarterback round 2, round 3, a little bit later on. My issue with drafting a quarterback in the first round was mainly based on a concern that the Jets would have to throw him in too early before he was ready, and the Jets would not have a solid infrastructure around that quarterback. I have backed off that view because the trades of Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams have given the Jets assets that they need to build a quality infrastructure around the quarterback. So if there's a guy in round 1 who's available when the Jets pick, I have no issue taking him at this point because everything's changed since my early season proclamation that the Jets should not draft a quarterback in the first round. They now have the assets to build a quality core around that quarterback. I think they should just look for a different veteran stopgap, whether that's Marcus Mariota. So that's one name I'll throw out there because I do think he might be available this offseason. But they should look for maybe an upgraded version of Tyrod Taylor. I think Tyrod's kind of like a low-end backup at this point. So if they can get like a better version of the veteran stopgap guy, that would make sense. And then if you got an extra late-round pick, maybe look for somebody with a little bit more upside than Brady Cook. It's not the end of the world if Brady Cook's back as the number 3 quarterback next year, but I just don't think he's got a lot of upside. And the other thing you have to remember is that it's not like the Jets viewed Brady Cook as some sort of great future prospect. If Jordan Travis doesn't retire before the start of the season, Brady Cook's not here. Brady Cook owes his roster spot to Jordan Travis retiring. The original plan was not for Brady Cook to be part of this team. So that's something to consider because I think there's this perception that the Jets view Brady Cook as have viewed Brady Cook as like a potential part of their future, when in reality, they just kept him because they needed a third quarterback. And, the other option was Adrian Martinez, who I thought, frankly, was better in the preseason. But they went younger with Cook. I don't think that there's really anything lost by letting Brady Cook go. So my plan in general, I think, would be, maybe try and draft someone relatively early, someone relatively late, and sign a veteran. But the names are tough to come up with right now because we don't know who's going to be available and we don't know who the Jets are going to have access to. So feel free to ask that question again, Dan, once we get to the offseason, because I might be able to give you a more detailed response. But I do have some broad thoughts on what the Jets should do. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what the Jets have done. Aaron Glenn, Darren Mougey in their first year. Tough to grade them definitively, but we can give an early progress report on what they've done well and what they've done poorly. That's what we'll do as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Aura Frames. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. And if you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap, it's a way to share memories, because Aura is not just your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it, so when they plug in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. You can give this to grandparents, parents, newlyweds, anyone who likes photos. Endless uploads of pictures and 30-second videos are available through the Aura app. You can add a personalized message right inside the frame, so the gift feels thoughtful the moment it's opened, and packaging comes gift ready. No price tag, no wrapping needed. It's a huge win. And for a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver Matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code LOCKEDON at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code LOCKEDON. The deal is exclusive to listeners, and the frames sell out fast. So order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On Wednesdays, we do our mailbag show. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's continue now. Our next question. What's your opinion on our GM so far and our head coach? What would you like to see him improve on? What do you think he excels at? What's one thing that has surprised you about him? Yeah, great question. I'm going to throw out the caveat that it's very early. And I'm throwing Aaron Glenn in because I really think that the Jets, for the first time in a while, are driven more by their head coach than their GM when it comes to personnel. I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way, because I think that Mougey is Glenn's guy. Mougey is there to implement Glenn's wishes. And we've seen so many times with the Jets where the head coach and GM were not on the same page. So I don't think it's a bad thing that Glenn is kind of the guy in charge. What would I say that they're good at so far? Well, you know what? They've hit on a lot of projections. Brandon Stevens was a head scratcher when they made the sign. And by the way, it's not just Jets fans who are saying this. I mean, I've heard this from fans of other teams who were saying, why did the Jets sign Brandon Stevens? Well, that's looking like a pretty good signing. At the end of the preseason, they went out and got Jawan Briggs. They traded for Jawan Briggs. And at the time, I was saying, well, this guy's available off waivers. Why would you trade for him? Is this guy really that good that you don't want to risk losing him when you have a good chance of getting him on waivers? Is it really good enough that you want to give up draft capital no matter how small? And I think the answer so far has been yes. So they've hit on some projections. That's a very encouraging thing. Another thing that I like is that it seems like these guys are willing to admit and change direction when they've made a mistake. And that's not common in the NFL. What they did at the defensive tackle position this offseason in free agency did not work. You know what? They went out and got 2 new defensive tackles at the end of the preseason. They just said, you know what we were trying to do didn't work. We're going to try something new. I like that a lot. I think that's a really good thing. The big thing is that there's a vision right now with this team. You can understand that there's a clear plan, and that has not always been true with the Jets. It hasn't always been clear whether there was a plan in place to begin with. You see what these guys are trying to do. You can love or hate the Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams trades. And I'll be honest with you, I was kind of upset when the Jets made them, but you like seeing that there's a definitive plan in place. There's going to be a youth movement here. We're going to have the pieces to build around a young quarterback. That's a real positive thing. What don't I like? They haven't figured out the quarterback spot yet. And, going back to what I said about Justin Fields, I mean, you can say Justin Fields has been an issue. Well, they brought him in. If you don't like the contract they gave Justin Fields, and look, I don't think it was a big deal. I mean, they had to sign somebody, and Fields is making very little by the standards of veteran quarterbacks. But if you don't like that, well, they were the guys who brought him in. I don't think that there was really good vision on. I don't think that there was really thoughts about tailoring the offense to what Fields' skill set's supposed to be. So, that I didn't like. They have to figure out the quarterback position. I think that's troubling. I didn't like some of their approach in the 2025 draft because it felt like there were lots of luxury moves. I think the first pick, Armand Bambou at right tackle, that was a great pick. It made a lot of sense. But after that, we'll see what Mason Taylor does. is a tight end in the second round really where you want to go? Is a safety, and I like Malachi Moore, but there wasn't a lot of meat and potatoes in that draft. There was no developmental offensive lineman. There was a first round offensive lineman, but it would have made sense to me to take a developmental offensive lineman. I also didn't like the trade ups. I didn't like trading up for Tyler Barron. I thought that was a puzzling move. So I think the way they handled the first draft left me scratching my head a little bit. And look, I'm not saying the first draft ended up going badly. I think that they probably got Bamboo, who looks like a keeper at tackle, and they got some other good pieces in the draft. But there were some aspects of that draft that I did not love. But the big work is ahead. The most important jobs they have are still in the future. We're only 12 games into this regime, so still very early. I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about with these guys. And the last question, what surprised me, I didn't think they were going to trade Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. That was a bold move. I mean, that is, there are a handful of moves that define a tenure. Those were some of those moves. I did not think they'd make moves like that so early. So that to me was the big surprise. So I think there's a lot to like. I think there's been some things that aren't so clear right now, but we're still very early in the tenure. This is year one of a rebuild. It's year one of a big project. So still a very long way to go. Next question. Hey, Johnny boy, the Titans are going to have a new coach. What if the new coach wants Mendoza and drafts him? Would you trade for Cam Ward, and what would you give up for him? I would not give up much of value for Cam Ward. I think sometimes what happens is that you draft a quarterback early and he's a much bigger project than you anticipated. So I would not say I'm giving up on the idea of Cam Ward eventually becoming a good NFL player. But what I would say is that Ward needs a lot more work than I think the Titans realized. And a lot of teams realized when they drafted him. I mean, there has not been a lot redeeming about Cam Ward's performance this year in Tennessee. And look, the Titans have done everything wrong. You want to, if you want two teams that have done everything wrong drafting a quarterback, look at Tennessee and look at the Giants. You never want to draft a quarterback when the coach is on the hot seat, because the coach will view him as the savior instead of building around the quarterback. Then you fire a coach, and now your quarterback in year two is on his second offensive system. But that said, I mean, I think it's clear that Jackson Dart's ahead of where Cam Ward is right now. There just hasn't been a lot good about Cam Ward. And that's not to say Cam Ward can't become a good quarterback, but I think it is to say that he probably should sit for a little while. And I think he's really more of a developmental guy. I think if I got Cam Ward, it would not be as a replacement for Justin Fields as the starter. It would be as a replacement for Brady Cook as the developmental guy. So I don't think I'd give up much more than like a day 3 pick right now for Cam Ward, because I don't think he's close to being a guy who should start. And I think sometimes, and this happened with Zach Wilson, by the way, if you see the guy's not ready, even if you drafted him really high, you should just sit him. And, you should take the criticism that comes with it in the media. And, you should deal with all the fans who are going to be upset, because, you'll get a lot of grief, but it's better to do that and give the quarterback a chance to succeed than it is to keep running him out there and let him fail and, destroy his confidence. So I'm not in the mindset that the Jets should trade for Cam Ward. And if they do, I think, again, late round pick, and it's because he's going to be a number 3 guy who's going to sit for a couple of years, who you're going to develop, and you're going to hope that things work well for him. And if I did that, I'm not taking myself out of the running for drafting another quarterback early. I think, again, Ward is your developmental guy if you trade for him. And I think that some other team is going to have a positive enough scouting report on Ward last year that they'll give up maybe a day 2 pick and they'll make Ward their starter. That would be my prediction. So I don't think it's very realistic in my price, but that's the price I would pay. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll dive back into the age-old debate. We talk about it so frequently, but some Jets fans think it's better for the Jets to lose games than to win games. I'm not so sure about that, and I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. And with FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is the best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines adjusting instantly, player props updating as guys heat up, and you can bet on the next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. Looking ahead to this Sunday, the Jets hosting the Miami Dolphins, the second meeting between these two teams this season. The Jets coming off a win, but the Dolphins are 2.5-point favorites right now heading into this game at MetLife Stadium. It sounds like the line believes that the Dolphins will sweep the season series. Well, if you don't think so, FanDuel's the place to get in on the action. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live NFL bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question comes from Charlie, who writes, John, even if we don't treat draft value charts as gospel, let's say for a moment they're accurate. Then the difference between the 4th pick and the 7th pick is approximately a late second-round pick. Wouldn't you prefer an extra late second-round pick if Folk misses the field goal and the Falcons score? I'm sure you're sick of the to tank or not to tank question, and I'm sick of being conflicted on whether I want my team to win. You like my idea from years ago where the number 1 pick is consolation to the best team that misses the playoffs. In that format, you get 2 bad teams and their fans. Everybody wants to win. But until they adopt my system and until they have the quarterback in place, I'm team tank. So Charlie's referring to an email he sent me a couple of years back. And I actually think the NFL and other sports leagues should change the way they allocate the number 1 pick, because I understand that you want to help the bad teams get good, but at some point you're rewarding failure when the same teams are picking high year after year after year. So I like the idea of changing the way you give out the number 1 pick and not giving it to the worst team. But more to the point, Charlie's question is, would the Jets be better off losing games? Because at 4, the difference between 4 and 7 on the trade value chart is worth about the value of a second-round pick. And look, if in a world where the Jets actually can trade down from 4 to 7 and get a second-round pick, yeah, you'd rather have the 4th pick. But I feel like we say this every year, the Jets should trade down. And look, I'm the king of wanting the Jets to trade down, but how many times have the Jets traded down, in recent years? It almost never happens. And look, yeah, I guess in theory, it makes sense to want the higher pick. I mean, obviously, if you're picking 4 versus picking 7, you have access to more players. But generally speaking, in a typical year, there's really not a huge difference in the value you get from the 4th pick versus the value you get from the 7th pick. I mean, first of all, if you want to trade down, someone has to be willing to trade down, and that doesn't always happen. And sometimes you're better off getting the lower pick. I mean, I go back 20 years. Back in 2005, that was a year where the Jets were terrible, and people wanted the Jets to lose games to get Reggie Bush. They ended up winning 2 games in December that year. They beat the Raiders in early December. Then they beat the Bills on the final game of the season, which I think was actually January. It was actually New Year's Day. They ended up getting the 4th pick. They ended up missing out on Reggie Bush, and they picked the Brickashaw Ferguson with their first-round selection that year. They ended up better off by winning those games because the Brickashaw Ferguson ended up having a much better career than Reggie Bush. So, you never know about these things. I'm a big believer, though, for a team like the current Jets, where you are just loading the field with young players week to week, that you're better off winning. Because look at last week, the Jets won, and part of the reason the Jets won was because Adonai Mitchell stepped up. Isn't it a great thing that Adonai Mitchell's stepping up? I mean, we'd rather lose games where Adonai Mitchell looks bad. I think it's better for the team for having guys step up. And look, Jets are still going to be picking high in the first round. Jets are still going to have a chance to get a great player. I think the fear is always that there's going to be some transformational player who you miss out on by 1 pick. And occasionally that happens, but it's very rare that situation plays itself out. I mean, yeah, there was a game in 2007. The Jets beat the Chiefs the last week of the season. They missed out on Matt Ryan then, and that was one that hurt. But just as often, you end up in the Brickashaw Ferguson situation where you end up better off with a lower pick. You don't necessarily need a top pick in the draft to get a great player. And just look at the franchise quarterbacks in this league. A lot of them did not go 1 or 2 overall. So, I get the argument, but I think for the Jets this year, I'd rather see them win games. And I don't think they're really losing out on much. Next question. John, what do you think the Jets should pick up Will McDonald's 5th-year option at $14.9 million? I do not. I'm very down on McDonald right now. I think he's had a disappointing season. And if you go back to the show I did after the night one of the 2023 draft, I was one of the few people that was not annihilating the Jets for picking Will McDonald. I encouraged people to have an open mind on that show. And I loved what Will did last year. I thought he had a really good season with his 10.5 sacks. But at some point, you got to have consistency. And McDonald may be posting flashy sack numbers, but he's not doing it on a week-to-week basis. There's just too many weeks where he's not showing up. I think he's a liability in the run game. I think he's inconsistent as a pass rusher. In fact, when I was watching the game Sunday, I wondered aloud, like maybe he should move to linebacker because he's not a guy you can play 3 downs as a defensive end. And it seems like he actually has pretty good instincts. And he closes the ball like really fast. Like he gets when he got a ball carrier in front of him and no blockers. I mean, he just explodes to the ball. Maybe he's like the type of guy who's better off as like a hybrid where you play him on linebacker on early downs, and then on third down maybe you can send him after the quarterback because he's not going to be, because the run game's probably off the table on 3rd and long, so you can just use his pass rushing skill then. But the fact that I'm even thinking this speaks volumes about where Will McDonald is right now as a defensive end. I think very disappointing. I had high hopes of the season for Will. I thought that maybe this would be a year where he'd improve on what was a breakout season last year. There was all the talk about how he added muscle this offseason. Well, it really hasn't amounted to much. He's not better in the run game, and he's kind of regressed as a pass rusher, despite that 4-sack game against Cleveland and the good game he had against Pittsburgh and maybe 1 or 2 other good games in there. It just hasn't happened for McDonald. To be honest with you, I'd be looking to trade McDonald during the offseason for what I could get for him. Next question is from Taylor. John, I wanted to pick your brain more about our current receiver situation. Do you know if Mitchell and Metchie are under contract next year? If the Jets bring them back and presumably add more receivers this offseason, what place does that leave for Arian Smith? The guy the Jets hyped up all offseason who has a whopping 6 catches this year. Mitchell is under contract for next season. Metchie is not, but Metchie's a restricted free agent. So Metchie's contract expires, but Metchie only has 3 years of NFL experience because unfortunately he missed his first year because he was diagnosed with leukemia. So when your contract expires after 3 years of NFL experience, you become what's known as a restricted free agent. What that means is that the Jets can offer him a 1-year contract. And if the Jets do offer him a 1-year contract, Metchie can either sign the contract or he can go out and seek a new deal from a different team. The catch is, if the Jets do offer him that 1-year contract and he seeks a deal from a different team, he may sign a deal with a different team. The Jets can match it, and the Jets keep Metchie at that contract. Now, in reality, I don't think Metchie has a ton of value right now. He's had a couple of good games, but Jets just got him in the Michael Carter II trade, and they got him for practically nothing. So he didn't really have much value in the NFL before the trade the Jets made with him. And a couple of good games really going to move the needle on that. I don't think they will. So the Jets can just offer him a 1-year contract. He'll probably sign and take it and be back next season. As for Arian Smith, well, I think the fact the Jets added Metchie and Mitchell is not a good thing for Arian Smith. I think that kind of speaks volumes about where this regime is on Smith right now. And, one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier is that this regime, you can say what you will about them, they have seemed willing to move on and move on quickly when they realize they've made a mistake. And I'll be honest with you, that was not a pick I liked. I was really baffled by that draft pick when the Jets picked Smith in the 4th round because he seemed like everything about him suggested he was like a 7th round pick to undrafted free agent level talents. Really, all he had was speed. Not much production in college. To the extent he had moderate production, it only came in his final season when he was like one of the oldest players on the field. Kind of undersized, not a great route runner. Really struggles at the catch point. All he really had was speed, and that's just not a guy who should go early 4th round. And I think if the Jets were satisfied with Smith, he would be seeing more playing time right now. And it feels like these trades the Jets have made, it feels like these additions the Jets have made with Mitchell and Metchie, they've kind of pushed Smith out of playing time. So I think that, Arian Smith could be on his way out because he really hasn't shown much this year. I mean, I keep hearing from people, Arian Smith was always open. Well, when was he always open? Like, I'm watching the film. I'm not seeing a guy who's constantly open. I'm seeing a guy who's very rudimentary in route running. If Arian Smith's always open, I'm not seeing it. And, it's easy to blame everything on Justin Fields, but John Metchie had a pretty good game with Justin Fields as his quarterback in New England. Garrett Wilson was having a really good season with Justin Fields as his quarterback. I mean, I don't think there's any mystery about Allen Lazard's lack of production, even though Justin Fields was his quarterback. I think Justin Fields becomes a very convenient excuse when you're trying to make an excuse for a player, but I really haven't seen much from Arian Smith that suggests he can play. And I think that the fact that the fact that the Jets have these new guys getting snaps and Smith has kind of become an afterthought, I think that says it all. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you don't miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody, and tune in tomorrow. We'll be here for Crossover Thursday with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins.